So I think we can hit a good topic tonight. I've been wanting to talk about gluten for a couple of years, and I just haven't been able to wrap my mind around it completely. I still haven't done that yet, but I'm going to do my best tonight to try to get as much information out there on the topic so that we all can leave tonight not putting any more gluten in our body. That's really my main goal for tonight, is that we realize the negative impact that this protein has in our body, and that why we shouldn't put it in our body, what we can do if we do put gluten in our body, and then what are some alternatives to this protein, this gluten that is everywhere. So that's where we're heading, so hope everyone's at the right seminar tonight. All right. There's a lot of handouts too. I usually don't give this many handouts, but I've been requested in previous talks to, you want some more take-home stuff, and I get that. So the talk is being recorded tonight, so I usually take questions throughout the talk, but I'm going to try with such a large group to put them all at the end. We'll definitely have time at the end to get questions asked. So if you could save them to the end, that would be great. And it's going to be, talk louder. Okay. It is being video recorded as well too. So with my mic, in about 2 weeks on YouTube, this will be on there for all your enjoyment. And then it also is on our website as well too. So you will, if you miss something I say, you'll be able to sit there and rewind and fast forward and pause and stop and take notes. So I think that'll help too. So I'm just going to run through the material as much as I can. I got about an hour and a half. I do get a little bit long-winded, so keep me to that, and we'll go from there. So I kind of touched on my first slide already. I tend to not use my slides as much as I should. I really don't like PowerPoint that well. I'd rather just have a marker board or a chalkboard. But so don't get too involved with the slides unless I get involved with the slides. But they're just there to kind of keep my mind on the right track. But what's the deal with gluten? I already touched on that. We'll get through that. Why should I be concerned? How do I become gluten? And I put in parentheses wheat-free. So what's wheat? What's gluten? Why am I connecting those two together? And then how do I repair damage from gluten? How do I even know I have damage from gluten? Could ask that question too. And then restoring my immunity. So I always put my medical disclaimer in here because I do talk very passionately about what I do talk about, and so I do need to go over this. Everything I'm presenting tonight are suggestions. I'm not a doctor. I can't be your doctor. I do make recommendations. In a lot of cases I do see tonight, we can sit down one-on-one and I can go through recommendations individually, but I can't prescribe anything. I can just make recommendations to your doctor to change medications and so forth. As a pharmacist, obviously that's my job, but I can't be a substitute for your primary care physician or medical provider. So just so we're all on the same page with that. So you can't say Dan said, stop my Lipitor or this or that, or and I'm going to go on a complete Atkins diet tomorrow. It's not what I'm saying tonight. All right, so what is gluten? Gluten is actually Latin for glue. And so I think we all know this, but if we take water and flour and mix them together, we're going to get a big doughy mess, and it's going to be sticky and tacky and just awful. And then you run that goo under some water, and you're going to strip away some fiber and some other matter, and then you're literally left with just basically gluten protein. That's what we're talking about tonight. And we might wonder, why is a simple protein that's naturally found in a grain problematic to our health? Why is that? Why are we even talking about that? This is, a natural protein that's found in nature, and hopefully I'll shine some light on it tonight. That it is a natural protein, but as I'll go through this, science and engineers have tinkered with this, in my opinion, again, way too much, that it causes a problematic for our health. So I don't think we were intended as a species to ingest as much gluten as we are. So that's really why it's a problem. Our genes, our DNA, or the machinery that we have to digest and absorb carbohydrates and fats and proteins, our DNA is not designed to break this protein apart and utilize it for rebuilding our own bodies. So it's a protein. There's two groups to it. And this is not terribly important, but there's glutenins and gliadins, and we'll get into a little bit of that down the road, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. In your handout, there is a whole list of sources of gluten. I just put a few on here on this first slide, but rye, barley, spelt, kamut, bulgur, and of course everyone's favorite, wheat. So again, I'm going to kind of make two different buckets here. We're going to have a gluten bucket and a wheat bucket. So hopefully I can keep those separated tonight. So just wheat in particular is very problematic. The reason for that, wheat grains are, generally speaking, I'm going to make some generalizations here to keep it simplified, is a complex carbohydrate. We're all told to eat, whole grains. I mean, we hear that all the time. Even I don't want to mention any brand names tonight, but there's a popular cereal out there. It looks like a little circle, and on the box it's got this little, and I think they actually got it taken away now. But they used to have a little red heart on there saying that eating more healthy whole grains is helpful for our health, for our heart. And I'm going to disagree with that. That's just my opinion, but I'm going to hopefully prove to everyone tonight that you'll disagree with me as well, that eating whole grains is not heart healthy. Eating oatmeal is not heart healthy because it increases our blood sugar way, way, way too much. And the problem with that is when our blood sugar spikes very high, we have more inflammation in our body. So that's going to be one of my take-home points tonight is wheat in particular, aside from gluten, wheat in particular is going to increase our blood sugar much more than we would ever imagine, more than sugar. So we'll look at that. So the actual carbohydrate, this amylopectin A, is digested in the body by an enzyme called amylase into simple carbohydrates, and we all know glucose. Our brain runs on glucose. But that's the big problem with wheat, is that there's so much of this simple carbohydrate, and we just don't know this. We think, complex carbohydrates, there's fiber in there, there's vitamins and minerals on the facts on the back end of the packaging for the organic bread that I just bought. It's got to be healthy for me, and I'm going to argue that that's not the case. The amylopectin A in organic whole grain bread is the same amylopectin A that's in your Wonder Bread, in your white bread. It's going to negatively impact your health just the same amount. If you spend $1 on that loaf of bread, or $10 on the loaf of bread, and they sprinkle a little oatmeal on top and make it look very nice and pretty, might as well just save your money. Just not worth it. in the respect of, it might taste better, but towards your health, it's not going to do any good. So a key point, conventional teaching, such as that from pharmacy school that I went to, and the USDA says we should reduce our consumption of simple carbohydrates in the form of candy and soft drinks and increase consumption of complex carbohydrates. So that's basically what I just said, right? We've heard that message over and over and over again. Don't eat the Snickers bar, don't have the Mountain Dew, focus on your whole grains. I am going to disagree with that point. So over time, and again, we have all probably different opinions on how this looks and the time frames of everything, but I'm just going to speak in generalities here. Let's just go back 10,000 years. What we were looking at for a diet, and we can argue these points, but I'm just to make my point, fats was about 75% of the diet 10,000 years ago. Carbohydrates was about 5% and protein was about 20%. And that's what I'm advocating we go back to at least somewhat. The picture here of what we're typically told by the we'll call them U.S. experts, whoever that group of body is that we want to think that is out there. Maybe it's our doctor. Maybe it's what we see on TV. They're more advocating carbohydrates to be about 60% of our diet. That's going to cause a lot of inflammation in our body. If we look at the food pyramid, the bottom part of that food pyramid is, and somebody probably knows this better than I, but it's 6 to 10 servings of whole grains every day. I just think that's ridiculous. And then proteins 20%, fats 20%. So I think we've all know at this point now that the low-fat diet is not working. I mean, we're more obese than we've ever been. So if you have any low-fat foods at home, go home tonight, throw them out. Go back to the store and get the highest fat of that same thing. So peanut butter, don't go low-fat peanut butter, go high-fat. If you're going to get potato chips, get the full-fat ones. I wish they made a full-fat potato chip, you know, a high-fat one. That's the one I would buy. So we need a strong understanding of glycemic index. That's, again, another key point that I want everyone to take home tonight. What does that mean? What am I getting at? When I was going to pharmacy school, unfortunately, they didn't put enough stress on this when we looked at our diabetes module. They looked at total carbohydrates and teaching a diabetic how to partition their plate out, and X amount should be vegetables and so on and so forth. And we never really got into glycemic index. We talked about it, but I think it should have been stressed more. So I've gone through, in my previous pharmacy that I worked at, we did a lot of diabetes training. I managed hundreds of diabetics on the pharmacy side of things. And we were all trained that just manage your carbohydrates, take some more metformin, take some more Lantus, take some more Humalog. We'll just tinker around with your medications, and we never, and it's just like, it drove me crazy. Maybe that's why I'm here now. And so what is glycemic index? Very basically, it's the comparative blood sugar effects of carbohydrates in the human body. So what does that mean? Let's just look at that for a second. So I touched on this already. So when you look at white bread, it's going to raise your blood sugar. I'm just going to pick we'll just pick from a scale of 1 to 100. It's going to raise your blood sugar 69%. If you take whole grain bread, it's going to actually raise that even a little bit more. It's going to raise it 72%. Shredded wheat cereal, 67. Sucrose, 59. Glucose, which is what our brain runs off of. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We do need that. That's what this index is comparing everything to. Glucose is 100%. It's going to raise that 100%. A Mars candy bar doesn't look so bad, 68. And my favorite, Snickers bars. Yes. So again, if you're going, you're going to think you're going to eat a healthy snack. You're going to eat some crackers. You're going to eat some pretzels, some chips, something with some good old whole grain wheat flour in it. Eat the Snickers bar. You're gonna decrease the amount of inflammation in your body. So hopefully that's new information. It was for me.
This is like just having straight, great up to our blood sugar levels.
Yep.
That's what basically the glycemic
index, yeah.
index is.
Yep. Now glycemic index is, you're going to take in some of those foods, and it will affect obviously someone differently, individually to individual. The amount of insulin that's in your body, the amount of fiber that's in your GI tract at the time, the amount of B vitamins that are in your body. So glycemic index, it is relative to the person, but generally speaking, those foods are going to act, in everyone's body pretty much the same. So glycemic index, the higher the number on that glycemic index chart, and there's books written on glycemic index. I don't have a favorite. Get one, start somewhere, and you can look at that and say, okay, I'm gonna eat this for dinner tonight, or I'm gonna have this or that, and you can page through it and see what that glycemic index is for that food that you want to eat. Fruits are a great thing to look at. I always pick low glycemic fruits. Apples, blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries are very low glycemic. So I minimize the amount of citrus and bananas and that kind of thing in the diet. Not that you can't have those things, but they are going to impact your blood sugar more so, and it's going to cause more inflammation down the long road. So the higher the glycemic index, the higher the blood glucose, the greater the insulin release. So if you've any been here with Dr. Whitcomb's seminars, he talks a lot about insulin and insulin levels, and as your insulin level rises over time and so forth, when does diabetes kind of get come into the picture and so on and so forth. But I'm going to again just simplify things. But so your blood sugar goes up, your insulin goes up because that's your energy storage hormone. Insulin's a hormone. It's going to take the cells in all of our body, open them up, and say, okay, we just got a huge load, of a Mountain Dew. We have 60 grams of sugar that just got dumped down into our stomachs. we got to get rid of it. And so insulin's going to get released, and it's going to dump all of that glucose into our muscle cells or tissue cells, wherever it can put it, our fat cells mainly, and get it out of the blood. The body doesn't like so much glucose. It's very tightly regulated as far as where it likes to be as far as the amount of glucose in the blood. So insulin's going to be the manager of that. So then what happens is, if you don't burn up that glucose, if you don't burn up the carbohydrates from the Mountain Dew that you just drank, it's actually going to be converted into fat.
Well, we have seen that.
So I think that's a point worth making is carbohydrates, whole grain, complex carbohydrates, amylopectin A, let's go back here for a second, breaks down to glucose. If you're not burning that up, you are going to turn that into fat. So you're going to eat a bowl of oatmeal, and you're not going to, and you're not.
Why can we even live anymore?
It is going to turn into fat. I guarantee it. Okay. All right. So that's kind of just everyone's on the same page with that. So gluten, when I talk about gluten, a lot of times what is brought up is celiac. Well, if you're allergic to gluten, you have celiac disease. What is that? It's an autoimmune condition, and really what that does is it involves a very highly sensitive reaction to gluten, mainly this gliadin protein. They've isolated it down to there's 2 proteins I mentioned earlier. Not that that's terribly important, but you get a whole host of symptoms. I mean, you can react very violently to gluten when you have celiac disease. It's an autoimmune disease, and then what ends up happening is you ingest some type of gluten protein, and your body doesn't know, it overreacts, and it starts attacking other cells in your body that are part of you, mainly your intestinal cells, and literally will break down your intestines. It's horrendous. So a lot of times I get that, I'm not gluten, I don't have celiac, so I'm not allergic to gluten. So the point that I want to make with this, though, is that you can be sensitive to gluten in many different ways. I'll show that tonight. But then also, in addition to that, there's the carbohydrates of wheat and other grains that are going to be problematic for your body as well, too. So it's hard for me to separate. I mean, the topic tonight, again, that we're all here for is gluten, but you can't separate the negative impact of all the carbohydrates that come with those gluten-containing grains, if that makes sense. So I do have to lump those together in some regards. So there's a multitude of different, so amylopectin A, so there's other things in wheat specifically that we can react to. We can test for that. And we can look at those things and go through them and say, okay, you're not reacting to gluten, but you're maybe reacting to the amylopectin A. I can tell you that. I can feed you 2 pieces of bread, test your blood sugar in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, see how your body responds to that, and I'm going to tell you it's going to go up. And so I can make the argument that everyone here is sensitive to wheat because it all negatively impacts our blood sugar. So we need to have a good understanding of that. And again, there's other molecules. I'm not going to go in them, but there's other things that we can look for and test for. You might not have a sensitivity to the gluten protein, but there might be some other things in wheat-containing products that you don't tolerate well. So, can you go home now? No, I'm going to keep you here. I could have talked a half an hour about the history of wheat. I know Dr. Whitcomb has talked a little bit about the history of wheat. But why has gluten gotten so, bad, essentially, is that it's been tinkered with for a multitude of different reasons. What ends up happening is you get this hybridization going on with different wheat plants and so forth. Basically, the end of this story is that you're going to be able to produce more wheat, more grain, as you hybridize these different grains, these different wheat plants. Yeah. So what they've done is they've gotten to this Triticum aestivum grain, a wheat plant, and then they've gone through and they've actually tinkered with specific genes in these different genomes to make this particular wheat more flavorful in muffins. And they've tinkered with genes in this part of the genome to make this particular wheat plant more flavorful for pretzels and this and that. And I've got a whole stack of research that talks about that. I'm not going to go into it a lot tonight at all except for this slide, but it is out there. They're tinkering with all of the genetics of this plant to basically make it more addictive for us so that we eat more of the product. So I think it's important to also get an understanding of food sensitivities. So usually due to response from the immune system. So what ends up happening with a food sensitivity, there's some type of inflammatory signal. There's a trigger in the immune system that I put either tags or labels the food particle or particles as the enemy. So that's really what a food sensitivity is. It's the immune system that's basically kind of getting a little too sensitive, essentially. I mean, again, gluten in and of itself shouldn't be something caustic or that's going to cause ill harm, but it does. And so that's what a food sensitivity is the immune system is not registering correctly. It's reading the information incorrectly. And that information might be shellfish, might be peanuts, it could be the gluten, whatever we may be allergic to, right? So there is a disruption of the immune system going on with food sensitivities. It can also, though, be a lack of enzymes from the body. So a good example of that are lactose intolerant. It's a great example of a food sensitivity. It doesn't involve the immune, well, I'm not going to argue that point, but when you have a lactose, actually it's the enzyme, you're lactose intolerant. So you could have a food sensitivity due to an enzyme deficiency. This was a slide from my last talk that, and again, I'm not going to go through this completely, but what ends up happening is, this is basically my picture to describe leaky gut. There's a lot of biochemistry on here. But to explain it plainly, what ends up happening is there's these tight junctions that I've talked about in the past. Those tight junctions they start breaking apart for a multitude of different reasons, this whole cascade of the immune system down here. But the key thing is you've got food coming up on the top side here, and there's literally one cell layer thick between what you take in through your diet and what's in your bloodstream. And so this interface is critical. We're going to see a ton more research on enterocytes, microvilla of the small intestines. And essentially what happens is this is breaking down. If we can fix everyone's quote-unquote leaky gut issue, then we're going to have a lot less chronic illness in the world. But we have to understand that gluten, even though you don't test positive for that, I think can negatively impact this GI, this interface between what you digest, what you take in through your dietary needs, and then what's in your bloodstream. There's a huge amount of research that still has to go on down here in the immune system to kind of figure all this out. This just gives a depiction of the biochemistry and gluten reaction. And this is mostly related to brain damage, but what ends up happening is, I'm going to go back here, a gluten molecule, the protein's going to get in through the enterocytes, and the immune system is going to attach, I don't know what the exact one is here, but it's going to attach an antibody to it. And that antibody typically is going to attach, and what it will do is it'll signal these T cells and B cells to say, hey, there's something going on here, I don't like it. Let's get some macrophages and some other cells to come in here and clean this garbage up, essentially, is what it's saying. So when you get the combination of gluten, protein from wheat, and these antibodies that your body's producing, you get gene expression. And through gene expression, what's happening is you get all kinds of inflammatory markers that are being created. So if you think about it, you get a scratch or a cut or so forth. Your body's going to try to immobilize that area. There's going to be a redness, a swelling around that cut. And what it's trying to do is just isolate further damage in your body. And that's really what's trying to go on with gluten sensitivity, is the body is thinking there's some type of damage, some kind of injury that's going on. And what ends up happening is a lot of these markers in these gluten antibody conglomerates end up looking like different material in our brain. And so again, there's a ton of research behind this. And and this is where we get neurodegenerative disease. So this gluten antibody connection looks very similar to different molecular structures in our brains. And so that's a big problem. We see this with Alzheimer's, dementia, memory loss, Parkinson's, and the list goes on. So this is a big issue that, again, there's more and more research being done on it. But this is just one example of the problems with gluten, is that this gluten molecule, once it gets absorbed into our GI tract, once the barrier gets broken down and gluten starts getting into the bloodstream, it starts attaching to different antibodies, it starts looking like different cells in our body, and then the body doesn't know to attack gluten. Well, it does, but then it attacks different cells that look like gluten. All right. Gluten and inflammation. So some things we know from medical research already is gluten turns on the COX-2 enzyme. So if everyone's not familiar with the COX-2 enzyme, it's a very popular enzyme that if you block it, you don't have inflammation. So the really popular drugs that block COX-2, Celebrex, Vioxx, that was taken off the market for, we won't get into those reasons. And then I'm escaping on the third one. What is it? Dextra, thank you. We know that gluten's turning on the COX-2 inhibitor. It's turning on inflammation. We want to turn off this COX-2 enzyme. Turning off the enzyme lowers our body's inflammation, but gluten is turning it on, so it's pro-inflammatory. Not a good thing. So again, this is leading to inflammation. Gluten also turns on tumor necrosis factor alpha. Essentially, it's a cytokine, which then is the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. You can measure TNF alpha in a body, and TNF alpha is turned on for a multitude of different reasons, but a well-trained doctor that's aware of gluten in this issue can measure a TNF alpha level on a person and help them distinguish if there's an Alzheimer's issue or if you're prone to developing Alzheimer's. So this is scary stuff. This is your 6 to 10 servings of whole grain that the USDA is recommending us to eat every single day. So I hope I'm scaring everyone.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
There is hope at this end of this tunnel. Part of my job was to scare you tonight, but part of it was also to give you hope. So we're getting to that part. Gluten and morphine. Wow, what a great slide, right? So from medical research, we do know this. So gluten binds to the same receptor in the brain as morphine. Proven fact. Scary stuff. I don't know of another grain, protein, carbohydrate, fat that attaches to the same receptor as morphine. If there's one out there, let me know. I'd like to look at it. So that's why gluten is so addictive. It's our pleasure center. Yep. Mm-hmm. Gluten breaks down into a mix of polypeptides in the stomach. These polypeptides are able to cross the blood-brain barrier. So gluten itself as a long-chain protein, it has to be broken down. It's got to be broken up a little bit, but those smaller individual polypeptides, is 2 or 3, 4 amino acids long, that's what's actually crossing the blood-brain barrier and getting in to the receptors where morphine ends up attaching to. And that's why, again, it's so addictive. This is literally, gluten, let's call them byproducts, are getting in through the blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to be protective, but is getting through that barrier and causing a very addictive sensation. So that's why you can sit down and eat, Dr. Whitcomb talks about the Krispy Kreme. Does anyone know the Krispy Kreme story from Dr. Whitcomb? I love it. No. But long story short, you can, a dozen of Krispy Kremes disappear in like 15 minutes. It's kind of scary. So
right through?
Well, he ate them, and so.
Well, I can that.
Yeah, or you can sit down and eat a whole bag of potato chips. How can you do that? Actually, potato chips isn't a good example, but let's just say wheat thins. All right.
Oh, God.
All right, so insulin resistance, again, no surprise. It shouldn't be any surprise at this point. So what's going on is, again, we ingest gluten or we ingest wheat, which has amylopectin A, which we know breaks down just literally into glucose. Breaks down into glucose quicker than the Snickers bar. Increases blood sugar levels, increases insulin levels. So the pancreas produces more insulin. So what's happening is that, again, we ingest, let's just pick on whole grain bread, organic. It's got the oatmeal sprinkled on top of it. You spend $7 for that loaf of bread because you think it's going to taste so good. It's going to raise your blood sugar just the same as the Wonder Bread. It's going to raise up your insulin levels because your body is very tightly controlled on the amount of insulin it wants in the blood. And so your pancreas is going to wake up. It's going to produce a ton of insulin. This is going to go on every day for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. At some point, your pancreas is going to say, I've had it, I'm done. And so on a national scale, we see this. The risk of diabetes is going up. The incidence of diabetes is going up. I can't keep track anymore. Is it 30 million people are diagnosed with diabetes?
Is it like 1 out of 10?
It's like 1 out of, yeah, I mean, the numbers are just astounding. There's more, it used to be called type 2 adult onset diabetes. They've gotten rid of the word adult now because there's so many children that are getting diabetes and so forth. And again, we're feeding them 6 to 10 servings of whole grain every day because that's what we're told to do. That's the healthy thing to do. So your pancreas is trying to do a good thing of keeping up with all this sugar. What ends up happening though is that on the side of the cell, you've got basically, I always use the analogy of a lock and key. And so what's going to end up happening is the sugar's going to rise, the insulin's going to be released. That insulin's going to knock on the door of a fat cell or a muscle cell, and it's going to open the door. The insulin is going to just open the door right up, and the sugar's going to go inside, and all is good. But again, the pancreas is going to produce a finite amount of keys. That's the way I think of it. And so once all your keys are made, you're going to have type 2 diabetes, and you're going to be insulin dependent because you can't produce any more keys anymore. So that's what insulin resistance is. So there's all kinds of things we can do to decrease insulin resistance. The one real simple thing that we can do to decrease insulin resistance, stop putting wheat in our body, right? Great idea. So cells lose the ability to respond to insulin. The key goes in the hole. I think very simplistically. I hope everyone got that by now. Goes into the keyhole, tries to turn the lock doesn't open. So the insulin's there, the sugar's right outside too, waiting to get in, but the insulin cannot open the door anymore. Type 2 diabetes results. Again, so insulin resistance, it's no surprise. We're wheat and basically wheat, but the carbohydrates that are in wheat break down so simply, simpler than simple sugars really, that leads to insulin resistance, which then that leads to type 2 diabetes. All right. Signs of gluten sensitivity. I'm not going to read these through it all. Did everyone get a handout on this?
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
Right here.
Good. So I'm not even going to go through this then, but there is a ton of things on here. So kind of going back to the celiac slide, I ask a patient or customer that comes in the store and I go, are you sensitive to gluten? Oh no, I eat bread and I tolerate it just fine. Well, you pull out this list, right, and say, do you have any of these symptoms? Let me feed you 2 slices of whole grain bread, sit there for 15 minutes, I bet your blood sugars will be over 150. I'll call that a sensitivity to gluten right there. So I think everyone is sensitive to gluten. The gluten sensitivity hydra. So I got this picture, I think, from a seminar in Chicago. But a lot of practitioners, a lot of medicine, a lot of our healthcare dollars are spent on trying to fix all this stuff out here. The weight gain, the nausea, fatigue. I've got fibromyalgia. I've got joint pain. I've got osteoarthritis. I've got, teenage acne, adult acne. I've got bloating. I've got hormone imbalance. The list goes on and on and on and on. And we should be looking, not that gluten causes all of these, that's not my point, but we need to address it. We at least need to look at it and say, is gluten a possibility? It costs you, we can argue it's going to cost you $0 to go gluten-free tonight. you have to make some other dietary choices, and I've got some handouts on that I'll be touching on momentarily. But we at least need to address it. We need to start looking at this and saying, okay, can I cut out gluten for 2 weeks? Can I cut out gluten for 4 weeks? And see if some of these other issues have gone away. All right, so there's no going back after this point. So is everyone all in still? All right. I think this is just actually another list of signs and symptoms that you might have a gluten sensitivity or a wheat sensitivity. I've had a lot of these on this list, to be honest with you. My coworkers would say I do have a little bit of ADHD.
But that's also genetic. So you
can't blame everything, but you definitely have to look at it. Chronic stress, check. Depression, not so much, not epileptic. Focus and concentration, I'll raise my hand for that. My joints hurt a lot less. That's the one big thing in my own health that I've noticed going gluten-free is I don't wake up and feel stiff. My joints aren't so darn tight. I love that. It's a great feeling. Yeah, right. Yeah. Insomnia, really haven't dealt with that. I have diabetes, IBS, overweight, not a big deal. I will say I've cut out a significant amount of gluten since about 90 days ago and lost about 8 pounds. So,
Really?
I mean, that's doing nothing than just cutting out, I'd say 90% of my gluten. So again, but not a big surprise after going through all this research. Cholesterol imbalance, food cravings, insulin resistance, we'll talk about that. pH balance, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Osteoporosis, we'll talk about. Acid reflux, we can talk about that for days. Cataracts, wrinkles.
Wrinkles?
Yeah.
Well, now we're talking.
So, I'll sell you the most inexpensive wrinkle cream ever. It'll be an empty jar, right, that says don't eat any more gluten. Dangerous to our health. The one thing that I found interesting about this study, and there again, we can spend a lot of time on looking through all the medical literature, but I'm just going to kind of give you some little snippets. But Vandenbroek, he looked at basically looking at wheat and the genetics of the wheat and so on and so forth. But as wheat's been hybridized, the actual amount of gluten in the wheat plant has increased 40%. So that's why we're seeing more celiac disease. That's why we're seeing more gluten sensitivity, is because the gluten, on a percentage basis, the amount of gluten in a wheat kernel, trying to remember all the numbers, it's somewhere between 20 and 40%. So a lot of it's the carbohydrates, the amylopectin A. So there's a small part that's actually the gluten, but of that part, more of that is taking up that kernel. And so gluten is becoming more of a problem for our diets.
Even if it's completely organic, without all these different changes, it still poses as great a risk regardless.
Unless, yeah, you do. So that's one problem. So there's more gluten in the wheat that we're digesting today. It's also a potent source of sulfuric acid, more than any meat per gram basis. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is that wheat, or increasing gluten intake, increases urinary calcium by 63%. So if you're on a gluten-free diet, you measure your urinary calcium, let's just say it's 10. You go on gluten, it's going to increase your calcium excretion by 63%. That's a big problem in my book. So your doctor's telling you to take calcium, take calcium, take calcium. You're becoming osteoporotic. You're losing bone mass every year, so on and so forth. We need to build up your bone strength. A lot of the doctors out there should be recommending a gluten-free, wheat-free diet. You're going to say you're not going to have to take all those calcium supplements. You're going to be saving yourself money by going gluten-free. You're going to be saving your bone strength by going gluten-free. So key point here, though, animal protein is acid-producing. So if we don't know that, if you eat a high-protein, animal protein diet, it'll decrease your pH, so you become more acidic, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So you do want to balance that out with a high amount of vegetable intake. So if I'm taking away your 6 to 10 servings of grains, of whole wheat grain in your diet every day, we got to replace it with something, right? Healthy fat, healthy protein. But if we end up dumping in a lot of animal protein, that could be problematic too. So I want you to balance that out with a lot of green vegetables. And that's on one of your handouts too somewhere. So osteoarthritis affects 1 in 7 Americans or 56 million adults. That number actually sounds bigger than the number of diabetics in the U.S. right now. The same inflammation in your wheat belly or beer belly, however you're going to call it, leads to the same inflammation or inflammatory markers in your joints. So what's causing inflammation in your GI tract, with someone with a celiac or someone that's just sensitive to gluten? Those same inflammatory markers are ending up in our joint tissue and causing all this osteoarthritis. Here comes this TNF-alpha again, but there's a lot of different markers for inflammatory signaling that we can measure, we can look at. How inflamed are you? Let's look at your TNF-alpha, your interleukins, leptins. I know Dr. Muth did a talk about leptins here a couple of months ago. I'm not the expert on leptins, but they're another marker we can look at to see what is our inflammatory state in our body. Pop quiz time. Does everyone have a quiz? I don't even know if I got through all the answers yet, but let's look at them.
The anti-inflammatories, when you're filled with that, and you can see the markers in that, can you completely turn that around by going through being gluten-free?
You can drastically improve it. You can, not 100%.
Take like a bunch of tests, like
How do they do those tests?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, we're going to get to that. Yeah. You could.
Sorta.
All right, so true or false? Eating a Snickers bar will increase your blood sugar more than eating 2 slices of organic
No, false.
whole wheat.
Totally false.
All right, good.
What kind of
All right, so we're paying attention.
We're here.
All right, eating gluten-free bread is a healthy substitute for wheat-containing bread.
No, unfortunately. Oh, yes, that would help.
Ooh, I got mixed answers here.
But where are we going to?
I'm going to say false. That answer is false. So the reason it's false, yes. So the problem with gluten-free, so I don't want everyone to go home and eat gluten-free. Does that make sense? Gluten-free products. Gluten-free products are just substitutes of different amylopectins, different starches, different grains that are going to break down just as quick. Maybe not just as quick, but quick enough that it's going to raise your blood sugar. So if you substitute one grain for a less healthy grain, you're not going to gain much. It's a good analogy I'm trying to think of. This is a little before my time, but they had light cigarettes or low tar cigarettes, and then what was there, high tar cigarettes? I don't know. I'm not a smoker. It's like lesser of two evils, right? So the tapioca starch they put in gluten-free breads, potato starch, rice starch, it's going to raise your blood sugar. Not as much as gluten, but just enough. It's problematic. So I'd rather eat 2 eggs. So number 2. So number 2, I'm going to say is false. We can argue that, but yeah. All right. What percentage of the U.S. population is sensitive to to wheat and gluten? Yeah,
100%.
I'd say 100%. That's just my opinion. I'd say 100%. 100%. 100. Now, if you could probably say, how many people have a diagnosis and they've had the blood test and they have celiac? I don't know what that number is, but that's not my point. The ideal fasting blood glucose level is 100 to 120, less than 126, 80 to 100, or less than 149. C. Yeah, I would agree with C. C. Yep. The protein mainly responsible for celiac is?
No, it was that word you gave us.
Yeah, it's one of the 2 proteins. I'm not even going to go back to it. It's going to take me too long. No, that was a glucose. That's right. Gliadin. Yep.
Say that again. Which one was it called?
Gliadin.
Of course.
Yeah.
This is another language.
If my blood test comes back negative for gluten sensitivity, eating wheat will increase my bone strength.
That's a bunch of baloney.
Who wrote these questions? I'm not a good test writer. The blood test that will give me my average blood glucose reading for the past 90 days is, we didn't get to this yet. A1C. Good. We're going to go through those hopefully in my next coming up slides here.
Oh, so it's C,
C,
A1C,
yep.
not AC.
I think, yeah, that's actually that answer is spelled incorrectly. It's hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c. Yeah, there should be a little.
No HB, I think.
There should be a B after the big H. HbA1c.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
We don't know what it means anyway. At least I
And we'll talk about that here. Actually, this is look at this. Is that all the questions? Yep. Okay. All right. Determining baseline levels. So, I want to decrease everyone's inflammation in their bodies, and there's some things that I want to increase. So, fasting blood glucose, I want that less than 95. I was going to bring a glucometer here and get people to give me blood samples, but it ran out of time. But that would have been a fun thing to do.
Oh, so we don't have, you don't give us a copy of that. We have to write this down.
You might have the lab values in one of your handouts. No? Okay. All right. I can get this actually
It's a good thing to have.
on our website, or even I can email it out too. Fasting insulin, ideally below 3. That's a tough number to achieve. You've got to be eating that 75% fat, 20% protein type of diet. Hemoglobin A1C, 4.8 to 5.4. So when I was doing all my diabetes training at my other pharmacy, I'd be happy if patients got their A1Cs down to 6.5 or 6. So, and I can't remember what the exact numbers are now, but a hemoglobin, maybe my student knows this, a hemoglobin A1C of 6 is equal to what blood glucose level? 120? I'll look it up. Okay, we'll find that. But basically an A1C of, let's just say 5 to 6 is going to give you a blood glucose somewhere between about 100 to 120. So you want to get that A1C down probably more towards this 4.8 level. Fructosamine, I'm not the expert on that, so I'm going to honestly skip that. Homocysteine, it's another inflammatory marker that we can measure. You want that less than 8. Vitamin D, I've talked about that a multitude of different times. Vitamin D, here's a question. Is vitamin D a vitamin? No, it's a hormone. It's derived, we make it from our 136 is equal to 6. Okay. So I was advocating for my diabetic patients, the best information I had at the time was a hemoglobin A1C of 6. Well, that's basically an average blood glucose level of 136. Way too high. It's going to be a huge problem for that patient. So we need to do better jobs at getting these numbers under control. But your vitamin D is going to, again, a multitude of different things. It's going to increase your gut integrity or decrease leaky gut syndrome in a patient. So we want to get our vitamin D, or let's just call it hormone D. I don't want to keep calling it the wrong thing, at 80. A lot of lab values, I've seen a ton of vitamin D levels come through here. The reference range is 30 to 100. So your doctor may tell you, your practitioner may say, oh, you've got a vitamin D level of 42. Oh, you're fine. You're good. Whatever vitamin D you're taking, way too low, in my opinion.
You said it should be from 30 to 100?
I think it should be the reference range is typically 30 to 100.
And you feel it should be what?
I think it should be 50 to 100. And I think it should be more close towards the high end.
What did you just say?
And then your C-reactive protein should be at 3, or I'm sorry, 0 to 3. Another inflammatory marker. Can you turn the air on? The AC on? The air conditioning? Oh, cool. All right. I'm getting warm. I see people waving. Yeah. Or we're having hot flashes. So that's kind of all the background information, the medical side of things on gluten issues, on wheat. They can just wreak havoc all over our body. So I brought in 2 different products to the store that I'm going to start carrying. Unfortunately, they didn't show up. I literally have like 2 boxes of this today. So I apologize on that. That's why we made these order forms for everyone. You probably know me by now. I'm not a pushy salesman, but I do think that it's important to, again, when you leave here tonight, hopefully I've scared you enough that you're not going to put wheat in your body. There's also on one of your handouts where wheat and gluten are in, the backs of stamps that you lick. They're in shampoos, medications, processed meats, vitamins. So you got to look. Obviously, this is gluten-free, but you've got to read all your labels. Gluten is hidden in everything, and so it is problematic. Now, you don't have to be fanatical about it. If you stress out about it too much, you're going to raise your cortisol, and that's not good. So, but you want to be conscious of it. You want to be aware of it. You want to make smart choices. Yes, if it's certified gluten-free. It should be, right? I'm not going to go through a ton of this, but this product is by far one of the nicest products I've seen that kind of clumps everything together that can help decrease inflammation and increase gut integrity. So when we talk about leaky gut, we really want to make sure that we repair our GI tract and put it back to the way it was and then go gluten-free. So that's what we really want to look at. So the GS pack, essentially what it does is it takes your GI, it takes the intestinal lining of the human body and puts it back as best as it can to 100% condition. It's really what it's trying to do. And there's a multitude of different products that are going to be in here. There's the Cure Calm, there's a high dose vitamin D. Hopefully that's not a surprise. We talked about that just a little bit. Omega-3 fatty acids are in there. So we want to increase the amount of omega-3 fatty acids in our body. That's going to help balance out our immune system. That's a big thing that the fatty acids are going to do, among many other things that fish oils are helpful with. But what they're going to do is help balance out the immune system and modulate the immune system so that the immune system isn't hyper-reactive. And then one of my biggest favorite products is L-glutamine. I recommend that a lot for my acid reflux patients. L-glutamine is like putting a whole new layer of spackle on a wall. It literally just seals up everything. It's fantastic. The enterocytes, the single layer of cells that are in our intestines, they run on glutamine. If you don't have enough glutamine, your enterocytes are not going to rebuild themselves. Glutamine is the energy, it's the fuel for these enterocytes to rebuild and repair themselves. So you're putting back all the machinery into these single layer of cells so that they can do what they're intended to do. Keep the bad stuff out from what you've just eaten and keep your blood system clean. So I absolutely love glutamine. So that's what's in these GS packs. And then there's this, basically it's a broccoli, what am I trying to say? Just like a dried up broccoli support product that helps with the inflammation, detoxifies the body, improves joint health, and so on and so forth. Dehydrated, that's what I was trying to think of. So that's one packet that's in this kit. So there's a multitude of different things in here. So what we just went through are these gluten sensitivity packs. So there's 4 other products in here now. So the next one that's in there is this GI Restore. I've looked at bovine colostrum 10 years ago. There's more and more research out there on this now. But what that colostrum does is it provides IgG and proline-rich polypeptides. What those products are going to do, it's going to modulate your immune system. It's going to get your immune system back into line. And it's going to help with growth factors. It's going to provide vitamins, minerals, and the list goes on. So it's almost like a multivitamin, essentially, is what the GI Restore is going to provide. Let's see here. I'm going to go through this. So the GI Restore. So there's a multitude of things here. Supports a reduction of intestinal-related issues, protects against irritations from toxins, promotes epithelial growth and repair, promotes T-cell maturation, balances immune system naturally, quickly modulates, balances the body's cytokine panel. So we're talking about TNF-alpha, these different cytokines, these different inflammatory markers. It's going to help to modulate those in an effective way. Restores immunity and balance of the intestinal tract. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up in a minute. Prevents amyloid B peptide aggregation. So you get, not to get into that entirely, but what ends up happening is you get this conglomerate of different peptides or proteins and they start breaking down the intestinal lining. And it's hard. It's just basically hard to get rid of those, to break those apart. Let's see here. And then what's also in here is there's the same product, but it's a spray. It's again the bovine colostrum, but this one's more of a product that you would use when you have an exposure to wheat or gluten and you're reacting to it negatively. So you go out to eat, and let's say you eat something that you ask the waitress or waiter, is there gluten in this product? And they say there's not any gluten, and all of a sudden you start eating it, and you can feel it almost. You can use this spray to help to neutralize that down. And then they have a it's a 3-strain probiotic with Saccharomyces boulardii. So again, we could talk on hours about probiotics, but probiotics are going to help to, again, increase the intestinal lining. It's going to really, what they're going to do is they're going to get rid of a lot of the bad bacteria that is taken up in the GI tract, get rid of those different bugs, and reestablish the natural flora in the GI tract. And then a neat thing that's in this kit is micellized D3. So I've always been a huge proponent of hormone D. And what the micellized D3 does, it basically wraps a layer of fat. Vitamin D, it's hormone D. It's going to be hard for me to get used to my new terminology. But what it's going to end up doing is it's very poorly absorbed. I mean, we have to take a lot of vitamin D for it to get absorbed. So what this company's done is they basically taken a layer of fat and wrapped it around the hormone. And so it's basically encapsulated into a little packet. And so it's absorbed, the body's going to naturally absorb that vitamin D much more effectively into the system. So it's a very novel way to get vitamin D into the body. And then there's one other product. We have a couple of these in the fridge. This is a really neat product as well too. I have to look more into this. I apologize. I should have done more of my homework on this. I got bogged down with all the research. But this is a prebiotic, probiotic, and a multi-enzyme product. So this would be another product you could carry along with you if you're going out to eat. If you want to have that birthday cake, you want to cheat, so to speak, and not suffer all the consequences of taking gluten into the body. The neat thing about this is the enzymes in this product. So we talked about food sensitivities early on, about and there's different products like this already out there that we already know of. The lactate enzyme. People will still want ice cream. They'll have their ice cream and take the lactate product, or what's the other one? Beano is out there. We all know about these products. That's what Glutenza is. So you can still go out and have the cake or this or that, whatever you're going to do. If you're going to go out and have the cheeseburger or the pizza or whatever the case may be, you don't want to pay for it the next day. You can take the Glutenza. So
you don't want to pay for it the next day insofar as feeling ill.
Feeling horrible.
But it's not as if it's going to take away all the damage that it's done.
It's not going to take away everything. It's going to be the best next thing that we have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Too bad I can't just erase all those bad things going in.
So eating out, we should try to minimize this. And this is some little tips and tricks. But when you eat at your favorite place, try to follow your diet as best you can. Looking for getting rid of the breads, asking, is there a gluten-free menu? Is there gluten in this entree and so forth? We want to, not be afraid to ask those questions. And on most days, commit to consuming, the diet that's going to work best for you. Keep healthy snacks on hand. That's the biggest thing for me. Is luckily I've got Sendix right across the street. I can't tell. I think I know everyone there and their staff. And they have the best breakfast and the most inexpensive breakfast. Eggs and bacon every morning. It's like $2.49. You can't even get an English muffin at McDonald's for $2.49. That must be their lost leader over there, because what an awesome breakfast. Things we know about time. So just make sure that we do small increments and put small deposits in our health. So we know that to make best use of our time, what we want to do is just makes very small increments day after day after day. And we're going to gain from that, right? So those things we already know. So I want to just, as you leave tonight, I think that's my last slide, is you're not going to go out and maybe as you leave the door tonight, that you're not going to put any more gluten in your body. It took me a year to really commit to going gluten-free, and I still, like I said, I'm probably about 95% there. So I still do have the occasional cheeseburger and things like that. But we know the information now. We can make smarter choices because of this. Hopefully we can. And now we have an understanding of what is, hopefully a better understanding of what this gluten protein, why is it so problematic? It's everywhere. There's, I think I mentioned this, but like I was looking at my shampoo, but there's hydrolyzed wheat protein in shampoo. It gives us these textures and things like that. Yeah, it's just in so many different things. And that's, all these personal care products that we're putting in our body, we got to be aware of those because those things are getting through our scalp. It's a great way. Our skin's our largest organ in our body. A lot of these things that are out there are going to be getting absorbed into our body too. So as we focus on our diet, I want to make sure we don't ignore the products that are going on top of our body too and our skin. So, all right. I think that was it.
Thank you.
Questions?